Welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. I interview leaders, experts and business professionals from around the world who are bringing leadership principles and know-how into the digitally driven 21st century workplace, with focus firmly on the how-to rather than the what. Each episode is in aid of a charity chosen by my guests, and since 2020, we've made donations to over 80 global and local causes. Welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast with my guest, Dr. Alexa Chilcutt, a certified executive coach and subject matter expert in executive presence, body language, strategic communication, and leadership development. As faculty lead for Johns Hopkins Carey Business School's Executive Education Business Communication Certificate and co-lead for the Academy of Women and Leadership, Alexa designs transformational learning experiences for professionals everywhere. We discuss why executive presence is so important at all levels, what it means, and how to develop it and stand out from the crowd. As part of the conversation, we dive into Alexa's new book, The Presence Principle: Embodying Executive Presence to Lead with Impact. This episode is in aid of Oxfam America, to which we've made a donation as a thank you to Alexa for joining us. Hello, Alexa. Thank you very much for joining me. Please introduce yourself and your new book, which I must congratulate you on, by the way, The Presence Principle: Embodying Executive Presence to Lead with Impact.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. I'm excited to be having this conversation with you. And I teach executive education at Johns Hopkins Carey Business School in Baltimore. And what that means, a lot of times people are, what is executive education? It is where mid to senior level leaders come in for short 2-3 day intensive courses on topics like executive presence, public speaking for professionals, conflict management, team communication, those types of things. So I work with professionals in that way from industries across the wide spectrum and then also around the world. So people fly in from everywhere to come to these courses. And I also am the co-lead for the Academy for Women in Leadership. So my passion is really working with professionals to really equip them to get to that next level that they're seeking.
Great. And, it's so important these days that we have very relevant and appropriate executive education because the world is changing so much.
Rapidly, yes.
Not just with AI, but the workforce transformation and the huge leader shift that we see that is needed out there from traditional leaders to more 21st century leaders, let's call them, if you like. And therefore, your book, The Presence Principle, is for me so relevant. And maybe I should start by asking you, therefore, what or how would you define what executive presence is and why it's so important?
It is important to try to define executive presence because we've all heard of executive presence, but it's ambiguous. And we know based on research that the Center for Talent Innovation did a study where they found that 81% of people who received feedback about the need to improve their executive presence, that the feedback was unclear and they did not know how to proceed. So it's kind of an ambiguous subject, but at the core of executive presence, it's about an individual's ability to engage, align, inspire, and move people to action. When you think of leaders that you willingly follow, that you admire, it's all of these characteristics that we really break down in the book, what those characteristics are, but it's also somebody that you see as authentic. That kind of gives you that trust in them to follow them.
That's an interesting one for me, and I totally get that ability to engage, align, inspire, move to action. That's ultimately what we need. And we use the word authenticity and authentic, the words authentic leadership a lot. And maybe if you don't mind me asking you that same question around what is an authentic leader? What do they bring that inauthentic leaders don't?
Well, and I will say, this is one of the things that Carl, my colleague, and I, we began designing a course around executive presence for a Fortune 200 company. They were training their mid-level leaders and really preparing them to go up to higher level leadership or C-suite positions. And so executive presence was that kind of that it factor, right? So we started designing this. Well, we found that it resonated, but it only resonated with people if you focused on what are their actual strengths, what are their values. So tapping into what they already have to work with, right? Executive presence is not putting on someone else, the archetype of a different leader. And that's where authenticity comes in, is that we see that people are who they are, but it's over time. Because somebody can make a great first impression, but over time is where we see that do their attitudes and actions, behaviors match up with what they state is their values, their integrity, all of that. So that's why it's so important to focus on a strengths-based approach and a values-based approach to developing personal leadership.
Yeah, and that consistency is absolutely clear, isn't it? Authentic. What you
Yes.
see is what you get every time.
Yeah.
With a bit of development, of course, along the way. So drawing on that straight away and linking it to your book, The Presence Principle, what were some of the best examples of leaders with great executive presence that you drew out?
So I love that you asked me this question because this is the one thing that Carl and I did differently than other books. There are other books on executive presence, and they have a lot of case study examples. They talk about leaders and, so do this because this is what this leader does. We really wanted to approach it from an individual perspective. And so instead of us providing an archetype, because we knew that then people would say, but I'm not that, right? Oh, that's not really me. Or would feel that it was too lofty. We wanted to make this accessible for everyone. So instead, we asked people in the book, one of the exercises, because what we did was we created this book based on our 3-day course, but creating a resource guide or a workbook for people to, here's what it is, here's how you do it, and here's some things to try on, so that at the end, they have this personal development plan. One of the things we asked them was to think about their own experiences. Who do they have direct, right, experience with that they saw as someone with a high level of executive presence? Who are leaders that they admired, that they followed, that influenced them? And so we've really kind of put it back on the reader versus us providing that for them. So it's a twist.
Yeah, but it makes a lot of sense. And it's something that I would naturally do in workshops that you would say that's rather than using the same old examples, like you say in the case studies out there. It's like, who are the people that have really influenced you? It could be a teacher, it could
Exactly.
be a mate, it could be whatever it is. It doesn't even have to be in business sometimes, but it's those traits that make the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So and you and I, Alexa, can both think of people that have
Yes.
had an incredible impact on our lives in business and outside of business. When we're in the corporate corridors, what are the benefits of working in an organization where the leaders really emulate this? What's good about it?
It, just what you said, Jeremy, thinking about my own experience and people that I have been so influenced by that became mentors to me because they truly did embody and exhibit this kind of executive presence, but it was authentic, right? They had a high level of interpersonal integrity and values and action and, knowledge and expertise, all of these things, plus communication, you know, uh, they just all the way around had executive presence. But what we know through our own experiences, the benefit is that people are willing to follow them. They are not questioning where they're coming from, and especially in times of change, you have to have that high level of trust and feeling that your leader is competent and confident and has your best interest at heart. That's what creates a really strong organizational culture.
Yeah, it's certainly. Well, this link to culture is so important, isn't it? And
Mhm.
yeah, I'm willing to follow or be with you on this journey. And I'm certainly willing. Sorry, I'm certainly willing to ask less questions because I trust you.
Mhm.
And particularly, as you say, in times of crisis or times of change, that's really important to have that there. Um, and you mentioned culture at the end there. How does this link to effective culture building?
You kind of mentioned it, right? When a leader does not exhibit executive presence, when people don't see them as truly authentic and confident, we need a confident leader to follow. We, they don't have to be an extrovert, right? This is another kind of misgiving of people thinking about executive presence. They don't have to be an extrovert. They can be very quiet, but self-assured. That self-assurance creates confidence in us. And so I believe that it's those strong leaders, those individuals. And the reality is that people with a high level of executive presence don't necessarily have to be in the highest leadership position to impact the culture. They can be at all levels of an organization, but whether they're managing groups or people, it has that ripple effect on an organization.
Yeah, I agree with you. And maybe an unfair question for you, Alexa, but
Okay.
yeah, but did you draw out or have you drawn out a link between executive presence and emotional intelligence?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because where we start with executive presence is you need that high level of emotional intelligence to have a sense of self awareness. How are people perceiving me currently? And how do I want them to perceive me? So it begins with self awareness. It begins then with, in an effort to build executive presence, knowledge, right? But then regulation. So we're kind of an empathy, social skills, and intrinsic motivation. All of those aspects of emotional intelligence are crucial to developing executive presence. And as you also said, over time, right? We have to maintain those good impressions, those good positive attitudes, behaviors, actions over time for people to truly trust in our leadership.
And that comes back to the point that you made is about this is as important in crisis
Hmm.
as easy as it might be when things are going well. So let's look at that flip side of that coin then,
Okay.
and look at those leaders who potentially have weak executive presence, especially in times of strategy implementation, crisis, transformation. What are the risks that organizations face?
The risk is truly falling apart. It's not executing the plan. And because if you are not a leader that inspires confidence and trust, especially in those times of crisis, people are going to not be willing to follow you. And one of the key characteristics of executive presence is communication. It's your ability to communicate clearly, concisely, compellingly, right? The three C's of communication. And so, someone who is not able to clearly communicate what the change is, what the crisis is, what the needs of the organization are, and how people are to kind of pitch in to kind of overcome that, what their role is, why it's important to them, they're not going to have that buy in. And so, it is crucial that leaders, you're just, I think we could probably all think of an organization in a time of crisis who didn't have a good leader. They didn't fill in the gaps for people communication wise. Well, then guess what happens? People fill in their own gaps and it creates more chaos, right? So there are just so many ways that it hinders an organization's ability to move forward in a positive way.
Yeah, you can see it's in some ways it's an obvious link, and yet we know there are so many leaders that aren't quite getting this right, and those risks are
Mhm.
very real for them, particularly now because it's a time of constant change, uncertainty, unpredictability. So for those tuning in, Alexa, say, right, I get this. I need to lean into this. I need to expand and explore my executive presence in a way that is really beneficial for my organization, also for my customers, etc. What are the first 2 or 3 steps that they should take to accelerate progress?
Well, and before I give you those steps, I want to just plant the seed in your audience's mind why this is so crucial. Out of a survey of 400 CEOs, corporate communication managers, and professional development leaders, out of that survey of 400, 89% said that a high level of executive presence directly contributes to career advancement. And 78% said that the lack of executive presence holds people back. It's also, and I'm also an executive coach, right? It is also one of the leading reasons that mid to senior level leaders seek out executive coaching. They know that they need to enhance their presence. So, with that said, this is why it's important. Step number 1 is to do kind of what I've hinted at just a moment ago, which is take a pen and a piece of paper, your phone, whatever, and write down 3 adjectives that you believe people would currently use to describe you. This is where that self-intelligence comes in. Whether it's direct reports, horizontal colleagues, or upper leadership, how would they describe you when you're not in the room? And they might be positive adjectives. Then what you want to do is so this is your current state. You want to then project and think of a future state. Maybe it is that position that you want, the just elevated perception of your leadership effectiveness. So I want you to envision your ideal, where you are, and think about the most desired adjectives that you would like people to use when describing you when you're not in the room. Why when you're not in the room? Because that's where all the decisions are being made about your pay increase, your job opportunities, advancement, etc. So you've got current state adjectives and future state adjectives. And as I said, those first 3 can be positive, but a lot of times what we see is an elevation of those adjectives. So I might say in those first 3 that I am hardworking or dependable. But what I really want to be seen as is strategic or innovative. So we're elevating that. That's step number 1. Step number 2, now that you've defined the adjectives or the impressions that you want to make, think about how to create those. So number 1 is define, number 2 is to create. Through your attitudes, actions, communication. If I want to be seen as strategic, then I need to adopt strategic in my language when I'm describing my work or when I'm describing myself. So how are you going to enact these adjectives so that people see them, you demonstrating them? That's number 2. And then number 3, absolutely think about your values, your strengths, and how are you going to maintain those impressions over time that truly are authentic to you. And then finally, of course, I'm an advocate for executive education and coaching. And I would say for people to find an executive education or executive presence course, we do a 3-day one totally in person. And to really kind of have a deep, intensive dive that allows you to take that time and space out, because what we know is that professionals are so busy. And leaders, they're so focused on what they have to do that they need that time to really kind of have a reset and a moment away from their busy day to day to be strategic and intentional about how to create and form new impressions.
That's worth reinforcing from what you've said there. Looking at that, what's my current state as people would describe me when I'm out of the room,
Right.
or when I'm in it, actually, with that state, I suppose. But that getting to that future state, that I like the way that you said it. Envision the elevated ideal. That's great. I love that. And then, okay, what are my actions? What are the words that I use, the language? Who do I need to align myself with? Who can coach me to help with this? And I fundamentally agree with you and completely aligned with that around the importance of a coach. And it sometimes can be a peer coach, right?
Sure. I mean, and I think we all need a sounding board. And if you can trust someone that really has your best interest, that understands what your goals are, that's going to give you that quality feedback, that's what you're looking for.
Well, getting to those actions, I can think of no better thing to do than, Alexa, than to get hold of your book, The Presence Principle. So how do people get hold of the book? How do they connect with you as a coach? And how do they connect to continue the discussion in other ways?
Well, lovely. So here's our little book. I know you have it on your links, but it's on Amazon. Obviously, Routledge is our publisher, and I will send you the link for a 20% discount for your audience. And the link, if they go directly to Routledge, they can get that 20% off discount for that. And then my colleague, Dr. Carl DuPont, who is an international opera singer, so interesting to partner with him to write this book, because he does talk about performance psychology and voice and all of those things. But he and I have a website together, which is thepresenceprinciple.com. And then we are absolutely open to people. Both Carl and I reach out to us on LinkedIn. We're very responsive and are happy to send people resources or answer questions.
Oh, well, thank you for being so accommodating, Alexa. And it's been a real pleasure to hear your words of wisdom and to get a little bit into your book and a little bit of flavor. And that mix between you and Carl, I imagine, brings out some fantastic stories. So, Alexa, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Jeremy. I've enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. Please like, comment, and support us on your favourite platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.